Just the usual, just press the.
All right, so welcome everybody. I'm going to be starting. So it's a pleasure to have Jonathan Duboul here, who is a professor at Brandeis. So Jonathan got his PhD at École Polytechnique in Paris, and has spent some time in the US before going back to France. He was at University of Pittsburgh, where he worked with our colloquial speaker, Bart Ehrmantraut, and this is work with him that was done later, and then spent a couple of years at in New York
at the Rockefeller.
At the Rockefeller, yeah, working with Marcelo Magnasco, and then went back to France, worked in a couple different places, including Collège de France, which is a really nice place, but then he came to the United States, has been here, and is chair actually of the Brandeis Math Department currently, and he's going to tell us a little bit about, so he's worked on many different things. He's a probabilist, I think, by training, right? And but has been worked on, he's really a mathematician. He's proved theorems in the past, but has also worked on applied mathematics, and he's going to talk about like more applied work, in particular applications to Parkinson's disease. All right, Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you very much for very kind introduction and for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. It has been very stimulating, and yeah. So I'm gonna show you a couple of works, different works around collective behaviors in neural networks, and I think this presentation reflects more or less my evolution from more theory-oriented works to maybe more applied. It's kind of going back and forth. So I'm going to tell you about what kind of dynamics you can generate in large networks of excitable cells, and how noise kind of interact with that, with their dynamics, and what kind of behaviors are generated due to the presence of noise. And based on that, I'm going to show you an interpretation of these dynamics in terms of Parkinson's disease, and I will finish with actual data on Parkinsonian patients, and trying to use our models to understand or to maybe treat Parkinson's disease. So, well, that was sure. I think there were more slides.
Yeah. Just play.
No, that's fine. Now we were on the last slide.
Yeah,
So fortunately, the last and the first are the same. So, okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, this is before I start. Let me acknowledge contributions of many people. I'm going to talk about works that have been a bunch of interpretations, and kind of many of the ideas came from Bart Ehrmantraut. I'm going to tell you when this happens. Experiments have been done in Laurent Venant's lab in Paris, and the latest work on Parkinson's disease has been the topic of Charlotte Piet's PhD thesis at Collège de France, and she's both an experimentalist and a computational mathematician. She's now a postdoc at Harvard, and most of the theory and theorems, they've been proven, and that was the work of the PhD thesis of Cristobal Quilinao, who is a professor of mathematics now in Chile. So let's go for it. So I want to show you first, I want to give you a little teaser about the surprising behavior that I feel. Really why I got very interested in the dynamics is that if you take a couple of cells, so here I have 1,000 cells, and they're all connected together, and they have a dynamics that has a single fixed point. when you put noise and you couple them together, if noise is small, you just see they're fluctuating around the fixed point. Nothing too surprising happens. If you have a lot of noise, they're going all over the place. Nothing really interesting happens, and nothing collective seems to happen. They're totally asynchronous. But what I find kind of surprising is that if you increase noise just the right amount, I mean, it's not just a precise amount, you have a big range of that, you generate a collective behavior where kind of the cells idle for a moment near the fixed point, and then they all together they switch. And then they complete a full rotation, and they get down to this fixed point where they will do exactly the same behavior. They will not be able to stabilize here, because if you look at what's going on here, some cells want to spike, some cells want to stay at rest, but the fraction of neurons that spike increases and increases until boom, you get this. So most of my interest, and so I'm going to tell you about that, and that's kind of the center of this work, trying to prove that.
Is this IID noise?
This is independent noise neuron per neuron, yeah, IID. So there is you don't add correlation between neurons. So each neuron receives an independent noise, and for some reason that creates regularity in the solutions. And part of these observations are not proven mathematically. And so kind of I'm going to tell you exactly what. But the end of my talk will be, the beginning will be a little more formal, then the end will be, we'll agree to, use intuition and simulations. All right, so work related to this kind of noise-induced synchronization include a bunch of works about stochastic resonance, big names. So there's a very good review by Benjamin Lindner in 2004 about noise in dynamical systems, and how you can get stochastic resonances and maximally regular behavior. There's work by Eric van den Eyden, Muratov, Lee DeVille. All of these people have looked at small noise in excitable systems and what happens near the transition. So when this fixed point is next to the knee of this node line, so when you're almost unstable and you add small noise. And there are levels of noise that create maximal regularity. This talk will be a little different because I don't look at small noise. It's kind of relatively large noise, but not too large. Okay, and it requires multiple time scales to get stochastic resonance. There are some old mathematical works from the 80s, mainly by Michael Shutsov, who looked at mean field limits of diffusions and suggested possibility for synchronization of these systems when a usual stochastic process would typically not have a periodic probability distribution in time. Well, usually not, but in mean field limits there is this theoretical possibility. We will see that we're in one of these cases in the neuron model. Okay, so before let's go straight to it. I'm going to start with a simple kind of example where I can exhibit this transition to oscillations. So in all this talk, I'm gonna refer to a neural network, a stochastic neural network. So take the time to explain you the equation. So I'm gonna have a variable x, can be multidimensional, okay, but it's kind of, it describes the behavior of a neuron, and I have n neurons. So xi will be the variable describing neuron i's activity, and you have a nonlinear dynamics, which is the intrinsic dynamics. So it's the whatever model you're using for the neuron. You can receive external input. I'm gonna always consider that we have noise. My noise will be Brownian motion. You can do a lot of things also with jump processes and spikes. And most of what I'm saying would works on Poisson stochastic differential equations with jumps. And it has been done by others. And then, so then the interactions that I will be looking at, these talk are also continuous, so I will have a continuous function here that models the interaction, so I have a slides format. So this term, this sum here, is kind of the showing the effect of other neurons onto neuron I. So you have a coupling coefficient Jij, which will tell you if you have a connection or not, and you could have a delay. I'm not going to talk about delays here, but so this is kind of the topology, but also population, neural population. So I'm going to consider different Jij depending on whether you're excitatory or inhibitory. The sign will be somewhere here. There's a bunch of problems that you can study in these equations. You can play with the scaling, you can play with the type of randomness that you're going to put here, maybe on the dynamics, maybe on the coupling coefficients, whatever. It's a very rich model. But overall, I'm going to be not going to spend too much time on static disorder. I'm going to consider that this is kind of connections are essentially homogeneous, but I'm going to concentrate on the role of noise. So, okay. And so my first part, I'm going to So I'm going to show you a simple example where we can actually prove that there is a periodic solution as you increase noise. Kind of a weird case where you can do everything more or less exactly. So the first thing I want to discuss, there's a proof here, but I'm not going to spend too much time, is that if you make regularity assumptions on the coefficient, on the functions here, and if you assume, for instance, that Jij are constant, no delays, you have a classical theory of interacting particle systems that will tell you that this summation here of interaction term will give rise to an expected value. So essentially, what's happening, and you can make sense of that mathematically. What will happen is that the behavior of each of the neuron will become independent in the limit n to infinity. So this sum now will be a sum of conditionally independent random variables, and you're going to have a sort of law of large number applying here. And so there's a proof that I'm not going to show, but it's a proof that can be shown in one slide. Okay? It's not hard at all. Okay? So if you use this theory and you take a classical model of neural network called the Wilson-Cowan equation, so you're assuming that you have P population and the dynamics is linear, not nonlinear, and the interaction only is a sigmoidal function of the presynaptic neuron, Vj only. Okay, the difference here is that my dynamics is linear. B of xi(xj) is just S of xj. In that case, you get a very simple limit. What happens is that this summation of S of Vj becomes an expected value, and now this expected value is a deterministic function. Okay, it's just it depends on time. It's related to some stochastic process, but it's a deterministic function. The drift is linear, the noise is Gaussian, so your solution is Gaussian, and you can describe it with just the mean and the covariance. And the mean is a simple, one-dimensional equation, where the expected value of S of Vj, I'm missing a square here, is just an integral, so it's a function of the mean and the variance of the solution. Okay, so this is some function of mu and v, and you can write also the equation for v, and it's a very simple linear equation where you have the time scale and the amplitude of the noise. Lambda alpha is the variance of the noise. So you end up with an ODE describing your infinite set of neurons, and this ODE has a dependencies in noise levels, so you can look at bifurcations of this equation. So in this diagram, I'm showing, so I'm looking at the system with two populations, excitation and inhibition. And I'm looking at, they have the same noise, lambda, okay. I'm increasing noise for both populations. And let's forget about the second axis. Let's look just at a one-dimensional bifurcation diagram. At very small noise, you get a fixed point. Okay, you get a steady activity. But as you increase noise, what happens in your system is that the fixed point disappears. You will have a saddle node bifurcation in the system. So this fixed point disappears, it actually collapses with an unstable fixed point. And as you increase noise, so you get onto this pink line. This pink line is actually a periodic orbit. This is the minimum and the maximum of your periodic orbit. So as you increase noise, you will create these oscillations. If you increase too much noise, you will have a Hopf bifurcation and oscillations disappear. This picture actually persists when you change the input I. Okay, so you have, but essentially your diagram has saddle node, a homoclinic bifurcation here where the cycle hits an unstable fixed point, and a Hopf. And remember this homoclinic and Hopf because I'm gonna find that these two bifurcations appear in other systems. Okay, so it's kind of not a coincidence. We'll talk about it. But overall, yeah.
A question. So the nonlinearity is not the intrinsic dynamics of each neuron that's linear, right?
Yeah.
And so the nonlinearity comes from the interaction.
Yes. Yes, so this nonlinearity, precisely, so it's expectation of the sigmoid
I see.
of the
interaction is
solution.
sigmoid. Okay.
Yeah. And this is a nonlinear function of the mean and variance of the solution. You know, expected value. So your nonlinearity comes from there. Yeah. Right, so you can see that so this tells you that as you increase noise, you're going to create periodic behaviors. And the fact, what I told you was that all neurons become independent and they have the same law. If the law is periodic, with a fixed, so then that means that all the neurons will oscillate at with the same phase, even if they are independent copies of the same process. They are independent copies, but they look very correlated because they have a mean that is oscillating. But statistically, if you subtract the mean, they're independent. And so you do see here in this simulation that you start from a high fixed point. As I increase noise, you get this full synchrony. If you increase even further, you get another fixed point. Okay. So this is a case where you can summarize your whole stochastic system with just an ODE. That's not always the case. And I've been always annoyed by this example because you can kind of make the calculations, see that you will have these bifurcations. But I've always missed, like how can you actually synchronize your network by increasing noise, stochastic noise at the level of each neuron? What's this phenomenon? Like more intuitively. And so that's where I started working with Wouter Montrout. I showed him that, and I showed him the dynamics, and I asked for his advice, and he directly had the intuition of what I'm going to present right now. So what I'm saying in this slide is that I'm now going to work with a model that is a little more reasonable for a neuron. So instead of looking at this Wilson-Cowan equation, which is supposed to itself describe a population of cells, I'm going to look at a spiking neuron, typically an excitable system. And so the go-to choice, I would say, for the mathematician is this Fitsug-Nagumo equation. It's kind of simple enough so you can do math, but it contains this excitability nature. So what's an excitable system? Sorry if I state the obvious, but that's what I'm going to say. My definition of excitable is a dynamical system that has a fixed point, globally stable fixed point. So you have a single stable equilibrium, but you have a threshold behavior where the response to perturbation has a threshold. So if you do small perturbation, you will have quick returns to the equilibrium. Okay, so if I move not too far away, I'm going to return with a short trajectory. But if you do a larger perturbation, you will have a very big excursion. So you have this separatrix here that separates a solution that will go directly to the fixed point after approximation, and those that will do this big excursion. And this big excursion is a spike actually for a neuron. So that's why this is a relevant model for neuroscience in a sense, is that you have this threshold behavior where you can generate or not spikes. So I can write a stochastic differential equation where I couple a bunch of these Fitzhugh-Nagumo equations. In that case, I couple them with a very simple coupling case. Now my coupling is linear. It's kind of a diffusive coupling. But what I'm going to say still works in other cases. I will have simulations. So mathematically, there's a bunch of difficulties. I don't think I'm going to talk too much about these difficulties. But from what I presented at the beginning, like this proof that could be presented in one slide, kind of doesn't work if you're not Lipschitz, and this V cubed is not Lipschitz, but essentially this is kind of a technical problem. The simulations that I showed you at the beginning, they were in the case of the Fitzhugh-Nagumo equation. And you can recognize these two null lines, and the separatrix is somewhere here. The statistics of my simulation that I showed you are exactly going to a steady state, a fully synchronized periodic behavior with spikes here for the middle case. So this is the mean over the population. And damped oscillation going to a steady state when you have two large nodes. So I spent a lot, maybe too much time, trying to prove all of these transitions and what's going on in that before I decided to go more for more physics kind of approach. We have a proof for this case where noise is small and you converge to a Dirac mass at the fixed point, although it's not easy to prove. We have a proof for large noise convergence to a stationary distribution, but the transitions and the existence of a periodic solution, we don't have a proof for that. Okay, so and so most of the proofs, again, I'm going to brush through it, but I want to really get to the most interesting. I'm going to skip that. So this is Cristobal. You can look at his papers, but we've been playing with this model. Instead of changing noise, we changed J, the coupling. With some rescaling of the coefficients and time, you can flip. I mean, the role of these two. It's not exactly interchangeable, but so we worked on J. When J goes to 0, we have a theorem that shows that there's some kind of spectral gap, and there's continuity. When you have small coupling, the system behaves as if it was a bunch of uncoupled neurons. So it's totally asynchronous, you know, and sampling a single distribution. So there's a spectral gap when you linearize around the solution of the uncoupled system. Okay, so, but let me not get into too many details. We also did the large coupling case when J goes to infinity. We have, so this is published now, it's no more on arXiv, and we have a new paper still on the same methods, where we're taking now J to infinity. And in the large coupling method, what we show is that the whole dynamics becomes irrelevant, noise becomes irrelevant, and the coupling term dominates, and it will force all neurons, it will force the system to cancel this term very quickly. And so you collapse on a Dirac distribution, so all neurons go to the same voltage. And then the voltage can have a dynamics. So it can either get clamped at a fixed point, or you can get clamped around the periodic orbit, and all neurons oscillate together. This is not the oscillation that I was looking for. These oscillations that you can have with the clamping arise when the system itself is oscillating initially. Okay, so it's not, you cannot generate these oscillations when you have very large coupling. So, just a brief word about the techniques. it's not. We don't use stochastic analysis to prove these two results. We use PDE analysis because there is a link, and I'm sure many of you know that. When you have a stochastic differential equation, you can write a partial differential equation on the probability distribution. This is a Fokker-Planck equation. In the case of the mean field equation I was showing you before, you have two added difficulties compared to other stochastic systems. The PDE becomes nonlinear. It has a quadratic term, whereas in general the Fokker-Planck equation is linear. And it's non-local. It has an integral on space. It's kind of a little more complicated, but yeah, we're not working with the stochastic system. We're working on the PDE, and so we're using analysis of PDEs. Okay. So now I think the most interesting part, the one without proofs, is why do you get synchrony in this regime? And so in Germany, so Sachs, Szymanski, Geyer, and others, there's a very strong group of dynamics of slow-fast systems in the presence of noise. And they have looked at the Fitzhugh-Nagumo system in the case of small noise. And their approach was to say that, well, maybe the Fitzhugh-Nagumo system as a whole is distributed as a Gaussian. Okay, and so you may be able to do the same trick as the one I showed you in the first part with the Wilson-Cowan equation. Just look at the mean and variance of this Gaussian distribution of the trajectories. Okay, but there is a problem in that, is that, so you get your equation x dot equals, let's say, x minus x cubed plus noise, okay? If you want to write the equation on the expected value, you have to somehow compute the expected value of x3. Okay, so the idea that they propose is to say, well, if it's a Gaussian, expectation of x3 has an expression according to the mean and variance. So they just substitute expectation of x3 by whatever formula you have for the third moment of a Gaussian. And if I try to do that in the system I was showing you before, I get a fixed point, whereas my stochastic solution is oscillating. And actually, so this is not working. And if you look at the distribution of voltages just before you have this big switch to oscillation, I told you to focus on this, on the way the cloud of neurons, separated in two parts. You can see that this is a calculation of the distribution of voltages just before, around here, just before you have this big excursion. And you can definitely see that it's not Gaussian. And it is this difference, these guys here that are preceding the oscillation, these are important for the synchronization. And that's what they're missing here, not giving rise to oscillations. So I'm going to call them pioneers because they initiate this oscillation. So I'm going to focus on them. I'm going to say, so if I have a pioneer and a bunch of followers, okay, the pioneer will want to spike. Okay, so its intrinsic dynamics will push it to this node line so that it can complete a spike. But the rest of the neurons will bring it back. Okay, so it's gonna be stuck in the middle of these two regions. It's gonna find an equilibrium value, and you have noise. Okay, so if you have just a small number of pioneers, they can stay here in the pioneer regime, and then followers can also be stable in the follower regime. If you have more and more pioneers, what happens is that the stability of this region changes, and you're losing this equilibrium, and you have a chain reaction where everybody spikes. So this is a simulation for an initial condition with a specific number of pioneers, and I'm looking at the maximum of the potential. So this is no spike. It's a small, it's a return to equilibrium or a steady state. But you have a chain reaction, discontinuity at a specific number of neurons, where it just goes to a spike. So it would be this increase in the pioneer that that gives rise to this chain reaction. We can actually.
So
Yeah.
let me get this right. So you have these two wells, right? And so you have a pioneer that jumps over, right? And most of the time, it's going to go back, presumably, or no?
No, it doesn't have to. So,
Doesn't it?
so you have a fixed point here.
Right.
If I trace this line, it's actually a fixed point.
Right. But this is what I'm saying, right? But you can jump back, presumably.
You can jump back, yeah.
So is it just one of these things where eventually, by chance, you're going to get sufficiently many of them that jump over, and then at that point there's no coming back.
No.
Okay.
I mean, you actually, yes and no. I mean, you will have an asymmetry. I'm going to show that.
Okay.
Just give me a second. But,
Yeah.
you're going to have an asymmetry in the rate of transition from rest to pioneers compared to pioneer to rest.
Oh, okay. This is important.
And so you will have accumulation probabilistically. So it's both random because you're going to
Mhm.
jump, but it will also give you this deterministic period, this exact periodicity, because as a population you're going to have a fixed time when you're going to reach this critical number of
Right.
pioneers.
And that's due to self-averaging. You just have enough of them, and then.
Yeah, when n goes to infinity,
Yeah.
it will be a deterministic time.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're right, we have two ingredients, chain reaction and this asymmetry in the rate. So for the chain reaction, actually, you can actually compute exactly where this chain reaction arises by assuming that your dynamic you can write a differential equation on the positions of the neurons that are pioneers or rest. And this is very easy, actually. Both of them, they will have their own dynamics, and the expected value of V will be whatever fraction of pioneers you have, plus 1 minus the fraction times the voltage of the followers. Okay? So this is your expected value, so that gives you a two-dimensional differential equation. You can do a bifurcation analysis on that, and you find this saddle node here that corresponds to the disappearance of a mixed state. So a mixed state is a state with both pioneers and followers. So when this mixed state disappears, everything goes to spike. Okay, so you can find that out very easily, and it matches very well. So the blue line is a simulation of the chain reaction fraction. So it predicts the reaction very well. So you do have this transition. So now we know that there is kind of a critical number of pioneers that will generate this chain reaction and a collective spike, and we're wondering, when do you reach this fraction? So as Chryso said, a neuron will switch to, so a pioneer will switch to rest with a certain rate, and a resting neuron will switch to pioneer. Okay, so I'm going to have these two rates, rest to pioneer and pioneer to rest. Okay, and in average, when you have a large number of neurons, so what matters is the fraction of pioneers. So that's why I have these functions of x divided by n, x being my number of pioneers. So your number of pioneers x is a jump process. It's going from x to x plus 1 with a rate, which is how many resting neurons you have multiplied by the rate at which they transition. And just the same, so the number of pioneers can decrease by 1 with a rate, which is the number of pioneers multiplied by the rate of transition for each of the pioneers. So this is assuming that they're independent. Okay? And so overall, you can write your differential equation on the fraction of pioneers. Right? Just based on that. So the fraction of pioneers will be 1 minus alpha, the rate to go from rest to pioneer, minus alpha, the rate to go from pioneer to rest. 1D equation. the only difficulty is to know these rates and to know if they're Poisson. And so we computed. So now it becomes really numerical. I'm going to look at these rates, and there is no theoretical reason why it should be exponentially distributed. In small noise it is, and there is a good reason, but at our level of noise there's no reason. But we found that there's a fine linear, I mean this is the log scale. So when you see a straight line, it's an exponential distribution. We can see that it's fairly exponential, okay? And the rate, so A is actually alpha,